Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Struggling Filmmakers. I'm Jimmy. Joined with me today is Noah.
Hello.
Emma.
Hi.
James.
Hello.
And a very special guest star, David.
Hello.
Hello, David. So, welcome to the podcast. Give us a little introduction.
So, I'm actually not a struggling filmmaker. I'm actually a struggling game designer. Shock and surprise. I started actually making films in July. So I made my first film with my sister. She's starting up a film company called Fawn Productions. So you can find them on Instagram and Twitter, and I think maybe Facebook as well. And essentially my sister, as part of her placement year at college, she made a play about modern slavery. And it got really well received. So we decided to make a film of it, especially since over lockdown, not anyone was able to actually see any shows. So we filmed it and we streamed it online, and it got good feedback, despite the fact there was so much chaos going on behind the scenes. You know, first film production, like audio getting corrupted, for like lost a whole day's worth of audio. And me dropping a light on one of the actors, which was great.
Nice.
But yeah, apart from that, all went well.
All filmmaking is just problem solving.
Before we jump into our topic of satire for this week, does anybody, of David included, have any recommendations for this week?
I saw 2 films in the last week. One of them was Dune. I finally went to see Dune and I enjoyed it for the most part. I think it definitely adapts most of the source material very well. Denis Villeneuve is a great director. We all know this. So obviously he was going to make a cracking film, and he does make a very, very good film. But I can understand some of the criticisms held against it. It's definitely not for everyone. Second film I watched over the last week was We Need to Talk About Kevin, which is, of course, recommended many an episode ago. I finally sat down and watched it because it's on Netflix, and oh boy, that's a lot, isn't it? Jeez.
Gosh, yeah. We discussed that in International
Women's Day
Women's, yeah. Brilliant film. I'm glad you finally got around to watching it.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, Tilda Swinton is amazing. So is Ezra Miller, which I wasn't expecting, because I know I've seen him in like a few other things and I thought he was okay, but in this he is like probably the most diabolical I've seen him, and it's just like made me sick. But yeah, that's recommendations done for me. Anybody else?
I actually have a recommendation.
Yeah.
Go on.
Go for it.
So, like I was originally going to recommend Dune as well, but you've already done that. But I will say that I was kind of frustrated that it stopped when it did, but that just means that it's just I'm excited for the next part, because it's just they stopped before the really good stuff. So
yeah, of course.
This is not new at all. It's just you haven't mentioned it yet, and I don't think enough people have seen it. Midnight Gospel.
Oh, I know that name.
It is essentially adapted from a comedian's podcast, and it was co-created by Pendleton Ward, who made Adventure Time. Short animated series. Essentially, it's like an animated podcast with sort of like bits of story linked in there as well. Very like Pendleton Ward's kind of style of kind of very weird worlds, all about this guy who uses like a virtual simulation to go into these strange worlds and carry out a podcast. And I absolutely loved it, and it's funny, it's violent, it's also very deep in the topics it talks about. There's a lot of episodes where they talk about death, and I was listening to it during the pandemic, which was a great time to listen to something talk about death loads. So
I've got a recommendation that kind of matches but kind of doesn't. It's the juxtaposition between a reality TV and a fictional piece of TV. It's a TV series on Channel 4. It's called Murder Island. Now I hear you ask, how is it reality TV? So we have 4 pairs of people from ordinary life and they have come onto this island in Scotland, Hershire, and they've become detectives. And a murder detective drama crime writer guy has written a story about this death. And there are these people, the whole village is populated with these actors, and these 4 individual pairs have to work out who the murderer is.
Oh, wow.
Ooh.
So definitely, I wasn't sure if I'd enjoy it, but I really have. So I would definitely recommend it.
That sounds awesome. What's it called? Murder Island?
Murder Island, yeah.
I've never heard of that.
I've seen
That sounds-
adverts pop up. And I
Yeah,
thought,
same.
Really?
What is that?
David, as our guest this week, tell us a little bit more about the topic.
So, I thought, you know what, it'll be great to come on the podcast, but what can I talk about? So I thought, you know what, let's talk about my favorite category of not just films, but like art in general, like whether it comes to films, TV, games. I love satire.
I know that, James, your favorite category is comedy.
Mm.
And satire and comedy kind of go hand in hand. I mean, not always, but satire is like a form of comedy and that sort of thing. But like, who'd like to kick us off with why sort of satire is so important? And the big question really of what is satire?
I was going to say, it'd be good to hear from David just what you would use as a definition of satire.
So, there are 3 types of satire, actually. I literally got a lot of these facts just memorized from doing my thesis. Essentially, what satire breaks down to is just you are showing an idea or a system or an institution on screen, but in such a way that it kind of almost dismantles itself. You're mocking this idea. And 3 different ways. I'm going to completely butcher the pronunciation of these names.
I'm glad you've brought it up because I've got them written down, but I don't actually know how to say them.
Horatian,
Yeah.
Juvenalian,
Yeah,
and Menippean.
that's how I'd say them. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. All right, so we agreed on a pronunciation. I think Horatian's the comedy version, where you literally sort of like you're exaggerating things for the sake of comedy. Juvenalian very much more towards sort of like making you angry, so stuff like District 9. And then Menippean is sort of like full. The best way I've found it, like a description of it, is like it's a full-on attack. So it's sort of like thinks of like Jojo Rabbit.
Yeah.
So like how Jojo Rabbit was very funny, but it had moments where you're like, damn.
It definitely goes there.
I definitely remember I was watching it with my parents and kind of the very mixed emotions of like I was laughing, my parents were both in shock at that one scene, sort of like the woman giving a grenade to a child and saying, go and hug that American.
Yeah, it's Jojo Rabbit is one of those films that's like shockingly funny.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
because it's real. It's not real, but it happened. Maybe not to that extent, but it's based on some historical event. So to then be like making it comedy, it's kind of like, are we at that point where it is funny now? Or and I think it depends on generation, doesn't it? Because like especially our generation, we are more open, less worried about how we say things, I suppose, and more freely to make jokes. And a lot of our generation does this self-deprecating humor as well.
A lot of topics that would have been taboo, like there's not many comedies about World War II in general, particularly from the German perspective, as Jojo Rabbit is. I feel like there's a lot more we can joke and laugh about, but also it's kind of caveated by you've got to be so careful these days. You've got to be the right person saying the right things, haven't you? So it's an interesting one, but it's definitely there's definitely a lot that we've almost come to terms with and we can joke about now that
it could have gone either way. That film could have gone either way.
Yes. Yeah, Taika Waititi, he can just sort of get away with anything. You do get that sense that he's just such a character that he could almost, if he turned around next week and announced that he was going to make, I don't know, remake Schindler's List and then do an ultra serious version, you wouldn't be surprised. I think that man can do anything, honestly.
Building off of Jimmy's point quickly about how
I had a
we're
point.
there was a point in there somewhere, don't worry.
Glad someone noticed.
It's where us as a generation is a bit more open to, you know, not necessarily mockery of some events, but just making light and jokes of it. I feel like for the further away you get, not in just generations, but in time from an event, the less more modern day people have a connection to it. And therefore they are more likely to joke at it because it's like, oh, I can barely remember that happening. Because it's just, to me, it's just a fact. Hey, here's a good example. The Producers, Mel Brooks, Springtime for Hitler in Germany. There was many people who thought that was a bit too far and a bit too soon. But nowadays, it's
the Charlie Chaplin one as well.
Yeah, I mean, and the Charlie Chaplin as well. That's even
Great Dictator, yeah. That was at the bloody time, wasn't it?
It was
Yeah,
1944, wasn't it? Yeah.
I thought it was like 42 or something.
I think you might be right there. I was hoping no one would pick me up on that.
That is an interesting point, because at the end of the day, satire is a commentary. It's supposed to be like, hey, look at this thing that's really bad, but it's too much to be serious. So I'm going to kind of be funny about it, but like it is really bad. So technically, yes, anyone could get away with it, but also no, because you have to have the audience to, one, recognize it's satire, because otherwise, if people don't recognize it's satire, then they're just going to be like, miss the point completely. And two, people to understand the context behind it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a basic point, but at the end of the day, it's all down to execution, because a poorly done satire isn't really giving anything back to the audience. It's just saying like, oh, look at that thing, and you're like, oh yeah, well done. But some of the most well-lasting satires actually have more to say than just, hey, thing bad, get it.
Does it always have to be something bad? Because Emma and James have said this thing's bad. Does it always have to be bad?
I don't think it does. Obviously, I'll let everyone else answer, but I think more often than not, it is, because we accept good things more than we accept the ugly side of things. So sometimes we have to be shown the ugly side of things.
Yeah, that's exactly right, because there's many things in our society that we kind of just accept as fact. It's just like, oh yeah, this is the thing that we do in everyday life and it's fine. But as soon as you kind of pick it apart a little bit and realize like, actually there's another side to it, and that side is like really, really bad, and you should probably not be supporting this as a whole. And this is a good segue to talk about my favorite movie of all time, The Truman Show. So,
I hate The Truman Show.
Yeah, so of course, The Truman Show, my favorite movie, is about many a thing. It can be plastered onto various themes, and it's an allegory for like everything. And probably one of the most like clear-cut allegories is it's an allegory for reality TV and the dangers of I know, right? It's crazy.
Very subtle. It's very subtle.
Yeah,
you might not get it.
Yeah, it's the most obvious concept in the film, and it's basically showing how just putting a camera up to someone and saying, just watching them do virtually nothing of interest, kind of like how people watch Big Brother and all the other reality shows, kind of like just after the time where this came out, which is surprising, is basically saying that the media that you consume is not good media. What you're watching is just a bunch of crap, and you need to be shown that it is a bunch of crap. It is all fake, and all the drama is pumped up for no reason other than to build views and get people talking.
It's also the whole thing of like this man who's essentially been sort of like very much like the audience of like a satire film. It's like someone who has essentially been believing a lie, and it just takes one moment to kind of have the whole like system taken apart in front of him.
Yeah,
it kind of
comes crumbling down piece by piece.
I guess building off that, and I kind of thinking about this earlier when we were talking about Charlie Chaplin making The Great Dictator during the time, and it'd be interesting to get your thoughts on this, David. Do you think the best satire arises and comes about talking about an issue that's present at the time? So unlike I say like Jojo Rabbit, for example, which was, I don't know, we can't do maths, 70 years after World War II, is there something to be said for satire that's commenting on something that's ongoing?
I will make the argument that what Jojo Rabbit is. Sorry, I suddenly saw myself on the webcam, really pretentious. What I kind of see Jojo Rabbit is actually doing.
I've got a
It's
pipe
like-
somewhere. I'll put it in.
What Jojo Rabbit's really doing
Little tiny
is that it's commenting on fascism as a whole, and I don't know, maybe fascism has been making a comeback recently. I'm not going to comment on anything. Yeah, fascism seems to be coming back, so it's something that is quite necessary. But I mean, that's a good point. Yeah, does it necessarily have to be something recent?
Jojo Rabbit's a great example as well, isn't it? Because a lot of I guess one of the big things about fascism in general, and also particularly like Nazification, is how like an entire nation got swept up in this mindset. And there's that idea itself is very relevant, I think, to today, with like social media and more mass media influencing people's thoughts. I mean, look at the fuel crisis we had recently. There was like one news story. Oh yeah, some petrol pumps are beginning to run out of fuel, and then everybody loses their mind.
But it was more specific than that. It wasn't even some petrol pumps. It was BP.
Yes, it was
Literally just BP, and all of a sudden every petrol station is swamped. And there wasn't a fuel crisis. The fuel crisis was built from media speculation,
on belief and people believing it. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you speak to so many people and they're like, oh, how on earth could someone like Hitler rise to power, and people go along with it? And then you get an event like this and you're like, well, people go along with a lot of things very quickly. And I think satire is a great tool for the great thing about satire is you can make a comment like that and people will digest it and kind of take it in because it's funny. They like the way the message is delivered. If you just said to people like, oh yeah, most people are really gullible and go along with things, people are like, I don't want to hear that, I don't want to listen to that. So I feel like satire is a great delivery system for a lot of like tough messages for people to take in.
Yeah, I'd be more interested to maybe explore. So we've touched on fascism, but maybe explore more areas that satire does touch on. Like, what are the popular areas we think? Yeah, go on, Noah.
It's got to be like consumerism and capitalism. Like, just off the top of my head, I can think of Wolf of Wall Street, They Live, Dawn of the Dead, American Psycho. Like, these are
Fight Club.
They're comedies and they're horror. There's horror. There's a lot of horror there, obviously, with Dawn of the Dead, when it all takes place in the shopping mall and they're all living off of it. And then you got They Live, where he puts the glasses on and he sees the elite, if you will. So yeah, and that's another genre that gets branched into satire, really, horror.
And that's moving away from comedy. So I guess that's Juvenism. What was it called?
Juvenalian.
That's it, Juvenalian.
You were close to me.
I got a J.
Yeah.
Yeah, horror and capitalism, they seem to be a good combination.
Same thing.
I think when you think of satire, and capitalism, like you just mentioned, I think the biggest example is Fight Club. Like, what's more making fun of capitalism than Fight Club? And there's some other themes, and I think satire is used really, really interestingly in Fight Club because it's so obvious that's what they're doing. And some of the other things, maybe satire sometimes isn't always as obvious, but in certain films, as we've discussed Jojo Rabbit a lot, but Fight Club, the satire is so obvious. But does it being obvious mean it's more or less impactful, or does it not matter?
I'm glad you asked this because I was thinking it as well. Because definitely one of the big rules about satire is you have to be obvious about what you're satirizing. Otherwise, people are going to get the wrong message. But then at the same time, people, if you're just going to go all out and say this thing you believe in is actually wrong, people immediately switch off. And actually, interesting about Fight Club is that, it was like a good satire of consumerism, capitalism, but it was also, I'm not sure how great it was at getting the final message across. I thought it was, but then years later, I found it was actually one of the inspirations for the startup of the Proud Boys. It was just like people getting the wrong message from it.
Yeah, I think it was almost too obvious at that point, and it became a game, didn't it? Like, oh, can you find the Starbucks cup? And was the message missed? I think I'd be interested to hear from Jimmy, and obviously Noah and James, you can jump in, but like, in your opinions, how is the best way to write satire? And I say Jimmy mostly because, you know, screenwriting is what he wants to do. And I know some of your things do touch on satire, like the porn star one.
Yes, yeah, that was a satire. I didn't even really think about that. It's funny how you can write something and not really think about what it is at the time. But yeah, that probably is the right word for it. My gut reaction would have been to say the more subtextual the actual satirical elements, the better. And then I realized that the thick of it is probably my favorite bit of satire, like anything Amanda Lanucci's ever made, and that kind of, you know, is as obvious and textual as it gets, because it that thing is so real that could actually be a documentary. You know, a lot of the things that are satirized are ridiculous and unbelievable, but they happen in real life, which makes it look like a prime target for satire.
It's almost timeless, that show.
Yeah,
like
it is.
Every like passing year, there's just something that happens within real government that you just think that you can see. This is a thick of it sketch. It's ridiculous.
Exactly, and I think there is some argument there then that being more overt about what you're satirizing is probably quite a good tool, because I guess if it's too subtle, as time goes on, if people are less aware of what the subtext is, it will lose some of its impact, in the way that a lot of films do decades after they're released, because people don't understand the cultural relevance of when they were about.
And also, David, like, how it's a bit different in games design, but how would you, because I know you've done a lot of work on satire, so how would you sort of incorporate it in a game setting, I suppose?
Well, I'm glad you asked, and I definitely didn't prepare this answer. So with games, like, what is quite interesting is that you, like, to make a game and design a game, you have to make a system for like the player to actually be a part of and interact with. And that's when, like, that's where I think a lot of satire games, or games like aiming to go for satire, kind of miss out, is the fact that you can make the system you're satirizing, and then you can sort of like have the revelation of satire being how you interact with that system, which was what I kind of tried to do on my thesis project. Is this kind of just sort of like show sort of like trying to gamify, like make a gameplay version of like what I was trying to satirize at the time.
What's the setting like?
You are someone who has come to an island where they are running a debate. I missed this bit out as well, is that one of the key parts of satire is almost having one character, which is almost like an outsider character. And when I discovered this, I was like, wait a minute, that's the player. The player is always going to be the outsider in any game. So I thought, right, I'm going to make a character who arrives at this island. This island is sort of like a new place they've never been to before, and they're running a debate, and they get you to run errands for that debate. And each of these errands are mini games on their own. And each of the mini games kind of comments a bit on the politics as well.
There is such an obsession. I think we might have even talked about this on the show before, if not privately, but there is such an obsession with society and culture these days to have everything fit neatly into categories. And when something comes up that doesn't quite fit, we just don't know what to do with it, do we? We don't know how to. We must label everything. This thing has no label. We'll find a way to change it so it works for the labels.
But like, that's just the issue with genre, like through and through, is it not?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
Because how maybe back when films were maybe simpler and shorter, it was easier to say this film is a comedy, this film is a horror. And then you get films like Cabin in the Woods, like thick with satire. Yeah, it's still a horror. So much comedy. Yeah, it's still a horror. Who are we? Where are we going? Like, that is an issue. That is the issue with genre nowadays. Like,
no, that's been a thing forever.
yeah, but that's what. Okay, fine. That's what I'm saying. It's been an issue for forever.
Did you say, David, whether or not you have a particular game that is your favourite or is the best when it comes to satire? I don't think you did you?
Oh, I didn't actually, no. It's quite interesting because sometimes a game may not be going for satire, but ends up being quite good satire. Like, for example, Untitled Goose Game. But if you want to find a good satire, sort of like This Is How It Is a good one, by a little known game designer called David R Mincer, on itch.io. You know, no plugs there. No plugs there.
Plug all you want.
Well, surely the greatest video game series of all time is a satire, and that's Grand Theft Auto.
Yeah.
Of course, yeah. That makes a lot of sense.
Full to the brim with satire.
And surely the controversies that surround that film fuel the satire about people moaning about the violence in it and how it's affecting their children.
GTA's definitely got more overt with its satire as well. Like, I feel like it used to be subtle, and now it's just.
It's very obvious, isn't it? Yeah. They just don't care anymore.
But,
No.
But leaving that to one side for a sec, James, we will come to you, I swear, in a second.
It's okay.
I thought it was very interesting what you said, David, about about games that weren't necessarily intended to be satire becoming satirical. Like, the first one that came into my head was Plague Inc., which came out long before coronavirus. Where
it's my favourite game.
It's so good, isn't it?
It's so good.
So much fun. Like, that came out long before coronavirus, and you could engineer your own, obviously, little virus. And then the other two big examples that people, I think, probably might generally be familiar with is obviously Papers, Please. I remember being a massive example, and that's, I think, what you were saying a bit earlier, David, as well, about how the gameplay mechanic can be like the element of satire. And I think that's a really good example of that. The funny thing is, neither of those, I think those both have elements of comedy within them, but they're both very not comedy focused. It's I forgot the word again. You've what was it?
Juvenilian,
that was it. Anyway, yeah, that's it really. James, do you wanna dig us out of this hole?
Oh, dang. A great satire, a game which has great satire of the concept of player choice, which is a game which is one of my favorites, is the Stanley Parable.
Oh,
Yes.
good choice. That's an oldie.
really good.
It is an oldie. It's 2013, so it was around the time that these game concerning player choice were getting popular. The Stanley Parable is a satire of that exact player choice, because you're basically saying, I want to go ahead and play a game, and then the narrator tells you, oh, and then you go ahead and I'm going to baby you through this game, and this is where you go. And as soon as you like veer off the path, then it becomes something completely different, depending on where you go. And that is it for a game which kind of takes the piss out of players taking their own decisions. That is the one game that I know of that I'd say in recent memory. The game's almost 10 years old now, but it's one of the games that I go back to realizing that it kind of gives you the most choice in what you want to do with it. And it's interesting how satire can kind of poke fun at an idea and also expand upon the very idea that it's satirizing.
When I was researching for this week, I was researching obviously films that had satire in them. And one film, when I first saw it, I was like, hey. And then I was like, oh, wait, no, that's so obvious. And that film was WALL-E.
Yes.
Yeah.
I was like, wait, where's the satire in WALL-E? And then I was like, it's from the start to the finish.
It's there.
It's like two different types of satire going on at the same, like pretty much in the same film. Like, they got the first half, which is all like, oh yeah, so we basically destroyed our world. Shall we leave? And then like the second half, which is literally like, we got these chairs that can do anything for us. Do we need to do anything? We just stay in these chairs.
It's another case of consumerism again, isn't it? It's just how they literally become fat blobs of people with barely any bones.
It's time we spoke about parody. And parody.
I can do my second point now.
Satire hand in hand. Was that going to be your second point?
Oh, I thought you-
It was my segue.
I thought you'd done with
Oh,
it.
You forgot to write it down.
I knew that you would want to talk about parody at some point, and I think now's
Yeah.
the perfect time. So, James, take it away.
Right, obvious satire, because it's the more obvious it gets, the wider it reaches in terms of like audience. Because you can kind of be subtle with your satire, but not a whole lot of the general going public will get it. They'll be like, oh, that's a good movie. But then you've got parody, which is so overt with it that people will kind of accept it. But then you kind of get into a hazy middle ground where as soon as you start doing parody and people like the parody, that becomes the new norm. And it satirizes less things and it just becomes a movie. So here's the example I came up with. It's Shrek.
Shrek.
Of course it's Shrek, isn't it?
Shrek is a staple.
Yeah,
Somebody once told me about that film.
So Shrek is, of course, a satire on late 90s Disney movies and just all Disney movies in general, if we're going back. Obviously, they have references to it, but it's mainly late 90s Disney Renaissance era kind of stuff. It takes the piss out of that constantly. And of course, out of the popularity of that, they made Shrek 2. And everyone loves Shrek 2. I still prefer Shrek 1, only due to the fact that I think it handled its satire a little better. Thank you, David, for the aggressive nod in agreement. Because Shrek 2, whilst it does have some more satire elements to it, because the land of Far, Far Away is basically Hollywood. They've got like their own versions of celebrities, which are the princesses.
Oh, it is.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, so it makes a whole lot of sense.
Sorry, I just got that.
Go on, Noah.
And it has the greatest joke of all time where the people run away from one Starbucks across the street to the other Starbucks.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great bit. And it's also a nice bit of satire as well about just consumerism, how like people just accept the fact that they're going to die and just go back to a completely, familiar location. So from the popularity of Shrek 1 came Shrek 2. And of course, Shrek gets ever more popular. And when you get more popular with Shrek, it just becomes stagnant and it has nothing to take the piss out of anymore. So then you get to Shrek the Third, which no one likes because it barely takes the piss out of anything except like high school. And like, what's there to take the piss out of really with that? It's interesting how like you can take satire as a concept and go really broad with it, as we've already discussed. And you can also go very minute in terms of what it focuses on. Because like with parody, you're just focusing on like literally one movie if you really want to. Sometimes it's like a group if you're doing like Scary Movie and stuff. But if we're sticking on Mike Myers, Austin Powers is basically take the piss out of James Bond. And that's just a satire of that franchise and those movies and those actors. And the time, if you think about it, because it's all about the 60s and how that was its own thing.
I think Scary Movie is a good example because Scary Movie obviously uses Scream as its basis. This is very much personal opinion, but like Scream is good satire, Scary Movie bad satire. Was not even bad, but like one is subtle. Here's us was not that subtle, even Scream, but it's like here's us playing with the conventions of horror and showing some self-awareness and how that there's a formula there. And then Scary Movie is just like I don't know, it's somehow even more overtly making fun of it, but there's less craft there. I don't know.
Those parody films are the worst examples of satire.
Oh.
Remember those Disaster Movie? There was Epic Movie.
Oh, the one
that was the darkest era of
yeah
filmmaking ever, I reckon.
Not Another Teen Movie is a personal highlight.
Perhaps we spend a few minutes talking about Team America. Yeah, I think Team America is quite an interesting parody because there's no way that it's not parody. But like Austin Powers, it's being satirical and making fun of something that already exists, that being Thunderbirds.
Wait, so it's not just what a good point about Team America is. It's got like levels of satire because on a base level, it is taking the piss out of Thunderbirds and the concept of like, oh, we're doing a really gritty action movie with puppets. And then when you go up a level, it's about America and the government, and then you go even further and it becomes, oh my god, it's just like this big Jenga tower of like how far can we go with some of its concepts. And it doesn't crash down, thankfully enough. I think Team America is hilarious still to this day.
Yeah.
And I love it.
I've not seen it in many a year.
Yeah, it's very good.
I think that I'm going to use this now as a segue to talk about my favorite satire, because I want to see. I need to have a moment to think about how broad this is, because there's a general kind of, it covers a lot about capitalism and about like the idea that you can climb your way up the system, or you can sort of like, you can actually get a fair deal from the system without actually having to, you know, completely dismantle it. And that's Sorry to Bother You.
I'm assuming, like, just judging from everyone's reactions here, I assume only me and David have seen this film.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
Cool.
Be correct.
All right. Definitely recommend it. I think it's on Netflix now, so
It is.
it's one of my, it's one of like my biggest inspirations, just because it's kind of, it's sort of like very exaggerated at points, but it's still not kind of in your face about what the message is. But it kind of, it covers a lot. There's a lot that it covers.
It is. Oh my goodness. There. This. Oh god. It's difficult to talk about this film because seeing it from an outside perspective and seeing what it's about, you like, okay, this can be a really good film. And it is. I think it's a very good film. It's definitely an acquired taste, especially because it hits a point where it's very obvious with its messages and its themes. And you're like, okay, this is where it's going. And then suddenly, as David mentioned, there is a shower scene where the entirety of the movie just kind of turns on its head a little bit. Just shifting tone into something you did not expect while still being
okay.
You're just like, okay, this has gone way beyond what I expected this film to go beyond. There are many things in modern day society that could be linchpin into just being a great satire film. Just because, you know, my love for the Truman Show is never ending. A film about not necessarily reality TV, but kind of just award shows as a whole. I know we kind of harp on the Oscars a lot because they don't mean anything at the end of the day. They're just one little gold trophy, and then you got a pat on the back, and then that's it, basically. Yeah, I kind of like to see maybe a film, maybe just a special of some kind, kind of take aim at award shows in general and kind of peel them back a little bit to show them what they really are.
Final thoughts. Satire is the best genre. You can quote me on that. David R Mincer, 2021. We talked about a lot, and I'm surprised we talked about satire without mentioning things like Dr. Strangelove. And like that's like one of the big satires. But yeah, I feel like a proud parent right now. This sort of like this is how, like, because I'm a teacher as well. This is how, if my lessons actually went to plan, this is kind of how it would turn out. So I was like, yes, finally we got a message across.
Fantastic.
But yeah, it's great.
I speak for all of us when I say thanks for coming on. Thanks for supporting the podcast. I see you week in, week out, liking our Facebook posts and all of, like, I know you're subscribed. So thank you for supporting the podcast, and we're more than honoured to have you on. We're always honoured to have a guest on with us and to discuss a topic. So we hope you've enjoyed your time on the podcast.
No comment.
On that note, thank you very much to David, of course. Thank you very much to you guys for watching, for subscribing, and you can give us a little comment in the chat if you want to let us know your thoughts on satire. But on that note, we are definitely going to continue to struggle. Hope you guys stay safe, and best of luck to David on all of your future projects and your satirical means. I don't know what that means, but goodbye. See you in the next one.
Guys.
On that bombshell, goodbye.
David, why don't you wrap us out?